The METUS Tech Show.
Welcome to the METUS Tech Show, a show for HVAC professionals by HVAC professionals.
The METUS Tech Show.
Mitsubishi.
All right, so Juan, what did you have for dinner last night?
I had three things rolled up on beef. I forget the name, what they were called. They were not burritos.
All right, they were enchiladas.
Yes, yes, and they had a red sauce and cheese over it. Oh, man, they were good.
Yeah, and what was that appetizer we had?
That was chori queso.
Chori queso.
Oh, that is awesome with chips,
They say chorizo,
with melted
chopped
cheese.
up and melted cheese, and then they give you a bunch of chips and they give you salsa.
And you dip away.
Yeah. I had the fajitas el jefe,
Yes.
which is basically like 30 pounds of food. They give you the sauteed onions and peppers, and then they throw in there some shrimp, some chicken, and some steak, and a couple of ribs and some chorizo. And if that's not enough, they give you a thing of beans and rice and two things of tortillas.
Tortillas?
Right? And then they give
Is
you
that anything like tortillas?
tortillas.
Now, that's something you wrote in
Did you ever watch
Wagata
it?
with tortilla.
No, come on. I keep telling you, Napoleon Dynamite. Quesadillas, tortillas. And then they give you, if that's not enough, they give you some corn, like a whole corn on the cob Mexican
Yes.
style, which is wicked good.
Wicked.
It's wicked good.
Mexican street corn.
And of course, I had because we were at, what's the name of that place?
Tequila Mama.
Tequila Mama.
Tequila Mama.
It's in downtown Swanee across from this, I guess it's a park. There's a bunch of people running
It was a
around.
park. It was a park.
Beautiful area, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had some alcoholic drink with a beer upside down.
Yeah, that was, what is it called?
Margarona.
I had more than one, I'll tell you that.
It's basically a margarita in this giant glass that you could basically wash a dog in.
Right.
Yeah,
And
it's,
before
and they put a Corona upside down.
Before everybody forgets, I had a quesadilla.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Delicious.
Would that be a quesadilla in Spanish?
I say how I want.
Okay.
Okay.
Brett, you're awful quiet. What did you eat?
I just had chicken fajitas. Kept it simple. And a Bud Light.
Boring.
No,
Wicked boring.
No.
He's new. He's new.
Yeah.
He'll figure it
He's
out.
not listen.
He's
He's only
trying to make an impression.
Roland. He's been here a month. He's only gained 15 pounds.
Oh, he's slacking. I don't see commitment here.
Yeah, I know.
I don't see
You're not taking this job seriously. All right. So what are we going to talk about today?
Superheat and subcooling.
Yeah, back to the basics.
So I'm going to make a confession here. When I got out of HVAC school, which was several decades ago, I graduated from there, and I'm going to be honest with you, I did not know or understand superheat or subcooling. I couldn't
Not
tell
many
you what it
people do,
was.
Paul.
No, we had the textbook definition. Brent, what's the textbook definition of superheat?
Superheat is the amount of heat added to a vapor above its boiling point.
Right, which means nothing. Right, that's
Not when you're in the field.
That's what the instructor kept telling me.
Yep.
You know, so then many years later, I started teaching. You know, at a local school, and I said, you know what? When my guys graduate, I'm going to make sure they understand superheat and subcooling because it's critical. Well, it's probably one of the most important things when diagnosing a refrigeration system you need to know.
So let me tell you my story. Okay. So back in the 70s, I did duct work, and then I eventually moved into
I
service.
was into disco then.
You probably had hair.
Roland's license number is 3.
So anyways, I remember working on a rooftop, and Louis, the guy that was a serviceman, and he said, we're going to looking for 10 degrees of subcooling right here. And I was like, well, what's subcooling? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just get 10 degrees. And about 4 years later, I was in a bar, and my buddy was going to school, and he brought in the white copy version of Modern Refrigeration. And I opened that book up, believe it or not, right to subcooling. And I read the first paragraph, and all of a sudden, 3 years just went click. I was like, that's why I'm doing it. And so it was pretty impressive. But I really believe that out there in the field, knowing superheat and subcoolants can absolutely get you out of a hole.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
Because for the superheat tells you basically, in my mind, when I take a superheat reading on a system, I just imagine where that change of state is happening. Mm-hmm. Where in the coil is it happening? If I got a high superheat, it's happening way at the beginning of the coil. If I got a low superheat, it's happening at the end of the coil. That change of state has to happen in that coil, in the evaporator coil. for us to have refrigeration.
Right.
And we're talking about this because when I do classes, and we get into the refrigeration part and I give a scenario, and I always ask, can we have refrigeration with 0 degrees of superheat? And I get some blank looks. The answer is yes, we can have.
Absolutely.
Can we have refrigeration with 0 degrees of subcooling? And I get those blank looks. And the answer is no. Without subcooling, there is no refrigeration.
Right.
0 degrees of superheat, we got liquid probably coming back to our compressor, really close to it. That's kind of the way I look at it.
It's because we got older systems back in the day and newer systems nowadays. Newer systems are so much more technical and precise and more efficient. And even in class, I'll ask guys, how much superheat did I have coming back from the evaporator? And they'll give me numbers and they're all good. And I'll say, what about 0? Oh, no, you can't have that. You're flooding back. Not if you have technology that knows that it's not
How to track it.
flooding back. Absolutely. Absolutely.
In fact, on an M&P series 1-to-1 system, work under normal working conditions, we're looking for 0 to 5 degree system superheat.
That's right.
On the section, at the compressor.
Yeah, at the compressor. The system superheat, just to clarify, the system superheat is the heat picked up in the whole system, the evaporator, suction line, everything. Where if I'm talking about evaporator superheat, it's just specifically to that coil, the evaporator coil. So 0 to 5 degrees, and it's a rule of thumb. And the thing about rule of thumb is everybody's got a different size thumb. So typically you're looking for 0 to 5 degrees superheat on an M&P series 1-to-1 system.
So what is the definition, in your opinion, describe superheat? Let's just go around the table. Describe superheat.
Well, see, I have to think of water because everybody knows what water is. Everybody's seen boiling water, right? And I always remember that diagram the teacher used to draw, the amount of BTUs you have to add to go from 32 degree water to 212 degree water, and it stays water. It's 1 BTU per pound, blah, blah, blah. So it's 180 BTUs.
Right.
But to go from 212 degree water to 212 degree steam, I'm not changing the temperature. I'm just changing that state, right? That's what, 970
0.4
BTUs
if you're doing a big boiler. All right.
So now I'm at 212 degree, which we call saturation. Saturation means I have liquid and vapor existing at the same time.
Does it matter how much of each?
No, it doesn't
Absolutely
matter how
not.
much of each. I don't want to get into it, but I always got confused when people said saturated vapor, saturated liquid. To me, that's the same thing. Saturation means they both exist together, which, by the way, is the only time the PT chart works.
Correct.
Is when you have saturation. So anyway, I'm at 212 degree water and steam existing together. Anything above that boiling point, 212 degrees, that's superheat. If I get 213 degrees steam, which is a vapor, obviously, that's 1 degree of superheat.
Right.
If I got 222 degrees, that's 10 degrees of superheat.
You did some math there. Yeah, so I saw you counting on your toes.
Did you see me take my shoe off?
And so, for the benefit of anyone that's listening that has not been in the field as long as we have been, where does superheat begin in the air conditioning system?
Oh, right out of the discharge line.
Yeah, you have a superheated vapor coming
right out of the discharge line. Right out of the compressor.
Right, because the compressor is a vapor pump. It has to have vapor in and vapor out.
Right. Coming and we call that discharge superheat.
Discharge superheat, sure.
Yep.
Discharge line
You have
superheat.
a high pressure, high temperature superheated vapor coming out of that compressor. And on a basic system, it's going to go into a condenser. Right? Mm-hmm. That condenser is going to do 3 things. It's going to desuperheat. It's going to condense, which is when it's going to go from a vapor to a liquid, and it's going to subcool. So subcool, Brent, what's the textbook definition of subcool?
Subcooling refers to a liquid existing at a temperature below its normal boiling point.
Right. So let's take that steam backwards. I have over, let's say I have 300 degrees of steam coming in. As I remove heat from it, as that's going through a condenser coil, I'm going to desuperheat it. So I'm bringing that down from 300 to all the way down to 212 eventually. When I get to that 212 degree water, I now start to turn water into steam. That's condensing. So I've desuperheated, I've condensing. Anything below 212 degrees is subcooled, right? One thing that drives me nuts is when people say, oh, I have negative superheat.
They can't have
There's no such thing.
There's no such
thing. I can't have negative superheat. Right? And no, so that's the subcooling is anything below that saturation point after it changes state, it's all liquid. So you need subcooling. Without subcooling, you're not going to have refrigeration because you need a column of liquid going to that metering device, which is where we're going to start superheating again. Is in the metering device is always going to be before the evaporator coil.
And I think that if even you can YouTube stuff nowadays too and get a great, video on superheat, saturation, and subcooling. You go through the whole process. You'll see it often in almost every single HVAC, some sort of journal of HVAC, is that you de-superheat all along the discharge line. You get to the top of the condenser. Normally, they say the top 20% of the condenser is where de-superheating occurs, and then they say the next 80% is where that saturation break occurs, and the last 20% is where that subcooling. The one thing that always drove me nuts, that when I first was figuring it out, was superheat does not mean hot.
No.
It definitely doesn't mean hot. And subcooling doesn't mean cold.
No.
Because I'm just going to go back up to New England for a second. If you look at air, and we could Google it, but I'm going to say minus 360 degrees is a condensing point of air. So the minute you're above minus 360 degrees, you're in superheated vapor. And I'm pretty sure at minus 5 degrees outside, that's superheated vapor. I'm not running around in shorts.
No, that's
I'm
right.
not doing that.
That's right.
So,
one of the teachers I had explained it this way. You take a bowl of water and you put it in a 400-degree oven, right? You have 212-degree water. That's it. The water cannot get any hotter than that. But it's going to create steam up to 400 degrees because that's what's going to happen. And, the teacher put it this way. If you're a monster who likes a 400-degree oven and that's your environment, that's what you like to live in, that 212-degree boiling water is going to feel cold.
right.
To us, it's hot. But because that's why when you open up a bottle of refrigerant, which you're not allowed to do according to the EPA, so don't do this.
Absolutely.
When refrigerant boils, it feels coldest, but it's boiling because its boiling temperature is well below, what we're used to. So it's going to feel cold to us, but nevertheless, it's boiling.
And refrigeration is all in a confined container.
Right.
So
I need to ask my question again.
Oh, I like
Because the question that I asked, I did get the right answer, but the answer that I got was referring to the whole refrigerant circuit. We were talking about 0 to 5 degree superheat at the suction at the compressor. So that was what I was referring to when I asked my question. Where does that superheat begin?
Oh, I guess it's coming back.
From where?
Evaporator.
Inside the evaporator.
That's what I want
Yeah.
those that are listening to this, that are struggling in understanding this.
Yeah.
Where does that superheat begin? It's at the evaporator.
Hopefully inside the evaporator somewhere. And hopefully, I don't know if I'm going to confuse people by saying this, but hopefully it's in the latter part of the evaporator is where the change of state happens.
Right.
Because just like that 970 BTUs to go from water to steam, that's the change of state. That's where I'm going to pick up the most BTUs in the evaporators of the change
Latent
of
heat.
state.
Absolutely.
And that's
in
why-
Latin, that's hidden.
That's why we have such a low superheat readings, because we're flooding that evaporator. The more liquid present at the evaporator, the more liquid there is to evaporate.
Well, and-
the more refrigerant evaporating, the more refrigeration effect.
And then another thing, too, is that's why we have a lot of individual circuits in the evaporator, because we're not allowing that to all happen in one general area. If it was one circuit, now we're having it happen in 4 different circuits. So we're able to get that, disbursement of liquid refrigerant better throughout the evaporator.
So if you're sitting there in your truck and you're listening to us and you don't understand superheat and subcooling, don't feel bad, because I don't think anybody
It's a process.
And I don't think any of
Absolutely.
us did. It took a while. But there are places to go. Somebody mentioned YouTube videos. There's the old textbooks. We've even got basic refrigeration classes that we're putting together.
We're
because
doing
we
the second one in October.
Yeah, we recognize that there's a need for this, for basic refrigeration and basic electricity. There is a need for this. So if you don't get it, if you're confused about it, don't feel bad. You're not alone.
Right. And where I have a lot of refrigeration work in my background with thermostatic expansion valves, so we always adjusted 10 to 12 degrees of superheat. So that really helped me a lot too, because now I can understand, or at that time I understood that coming out of that evaporator is not liquid. It is definitely a vapor, and it's a superheated vapor that I'm setting a metering device for. So
I'm glad you brought up metering devices because back in the day, and again, I'm not as old as you and Juan, but I'm close. All right. Well, But back in the day, it used to be, hey, if it's this is how old I am, a cap tube or a piston.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Actuator piston.
You're
Yeah.
going to charge how? How are you going to charge?
Subcooling.
Subcooling.
Back in the
If
day.
it's a TXV,
Superheat.
superheat.
Right.
All right. So how do we charge now? How do we know if I'm a technician in the truck, I got a system, any system, it doesn't matter. Right. How am I going to know what I'm supposed to have for the superheat or subcooling? Which one should I look at?
Right. Right. Well, if you want to look at our stuff, it's basically critical charge system, like a capillary
Right.
tube. So the charge is crucial. And the way we find out the charge, at least the way I tell my classes, is through Diamond System Builder.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a different subject.
Yeah. And then there's the old thing, what happens if I have a leak? It's a blend refrigerant.
Yeah.
Do I add refrigerant maybe to get somebody out of a pinch during the hot weather?
You know what happens.
So
you know
actually,
what
It
happens.
fractionates. Yeah.
I had a guy in one of our classes, and he had mentioned something interesting, which is that when they are in a pinch, rather than, because we do have a blended refrigerant, we are critically charged, rather than taking all the refrigerant out and putting it under vacuum, to recover just down to 5 or less psi, and then putting in our charge just to get them by until we can make our fix. It kind of saves,
yeah,
allowing any.
That's better
contaminants
than
into
just
the-
topping it off.
That's better. Yeah, that is
Yep.
better than topping.
It was kind of clever. It was
It's not the
something that I
perfect
thought
way to
of.
do it, but in
Right.
a pinch, it's better than because
Right.
you're
Well,
saving
you
all
keep
that
the custom up and running because you could
Right.
shut down business.
Yeah, but you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Listen, you've got 15 calls ahead of you. It's 3 o'clock in the
Yeah.
afternoon.
Yeah.
It's
We've all
a
been
heat
there.
wave. Yeah, it's going to happen. But yeah, it's critically charged. But it also, if I'm diagnosing something, if I want to know what it's looking at, first of all, I just want to make one thing clear. I'm not throwing my gauges on unless I have to.
Uh-huh.
If I've got a good delta T across the coil, across the evaporator coil, we're talking air conditioning, and I got a good delta T. I got nice cool air coming out. I got my airflow. It's what I'm going to check first is the airflow. Right? If I got a good delta T across that, I'm not throwing my gauges on.
No need to.
I'm throwing
If you
my
got a
gauges
good
on
delta
if I
T,
suspect
you've just checked airflow and refrigerant.
I was going to say, even if you had a poor delta T, I wouldn't even start with gauges. You're
No,
going to check your
then
filters,
check your airflow first.
restrictions.
The fans, everything
Good
else.
point.
Make sure if it's a ducted system, make sure all the vents are open.
Yeah, and if we're on City Multi, we don't even need our gauges 'cause we got maintenance
Right.
tool.
Yep.
So, and I can go to the dip switches and look at my LED screen, look at my pressures.
Yeah, now City Multi is a little different.
Yeah, it
because
is a
We're
little
looking
different,
at we're looking at superheat and subcooling in many different locations.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
So, real quick, bring it back to superheat. What do we need to know in order to calculate superheat and subcooling?
Okay, so if we want to calculate, let's do superheat on the low side. So first thing I need is my gauges, or I need to know what the pressure is,
Yep.
and then that my PT chart, change it to my saturation temperature.
Yep.
And then at that point, I need some sort of line, some sort of thermometer, or I don't particularly like the infrared. I do in certain cases, but I like to put some sort of sensor right on the if I'm doing the evaporator, right under my suction line, as close to the evaporator as
agree.
possible. So now I'm going to end up with two temperatures. One of them is a temperature that I'm looking at because of the pressure. I'm converting it to temperature, and the other one's I'm getting a physical temperature on the suction line. I'm going to subtract the two. Whatever number I have left over is degrees of superheat. So let's just say my evaporator is boiling at 40 degrees. PT chart tells me that. The temperature of my suction line immediately out of my evaporator is 50 degrees. Subtract the two, I got 10 degrees of superheat occurring inside that coil.
So we're looking at 410A at a specific pressure.
Absolutely.
That's going to give us a temperature. And then we're actually taking a measurement of that temperature and seeing the difference. And that's
Seeing
our
the difference,
superheat.
yeah.
That's it.
So you're
Degrees
measuring.
of superheat. Because what I do in my class, I draw up two lines, horizontal T's. I do one in red for the condenser, one in blue. I draw the horizontal line as my saturation temperature because I have a saturation temperature on both sides. And on the one in red, which is my condenser, I put an arrow going up. Anything above that horizontal line is superheat.
Yep.
I put an arrow going down. Anything below that is subcooling.
Yeah.
And then on the evaporator, I'm only going to have saturated and superheat. So I draw an arrow up. Anything above that horizontal line is superheat. And it's a pretty good graphic for them to see.
Yeah.
I need to clear something.
Go ahead.
You say you measure the superheat at the outlet of the evaporator.
Sure.
We're speaking of 0 to 5 degrees at the compressor.
Right.
Where do we measure that suction line?
Okay.
Well, you bring up a good point because there are a couple different kinds of superheat. There's
I get
system
that.
superheat and there's just evaporator superheat.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we have to, if I'm a technician, I need to know which one I'm measuring.
Which I just described, evaporator.
You grabbed evaporator superheat. Right. That 0 to 5 we were talking about earlier for the 1-to-1 M&P system, that's system superheat.
Sure.
Which we would measure on the suction line, preferably
close to
about
the
6
unit.
inches from the compressor.
Yeah, because you don't want the residual heat of the compressor interfering with that. So and that's a good point. So I could have, I do have superheat at the outlet of the evaporator. And whatever length that suction line is, every time I took a temperature, every foot or something like that, I'm going to pick up more superheat. So,
Right.
we look at specific locations.
Which, by the way, is the only reason we, well, not the only reason, I suppose, but it's the main reason why the suction line is insulated.
and it should be the right size with no air gaps in there.
That's right.
Because then you got condensation, you got problems.
That's right. Now we got, especially if it's running across a ceiling up in an attic or something.
That's right. So what about subcooling?
What about subcooling?
Where am I going to take my subcool reading? What am I going to use?
I still need pressure.
You should do it.
Right.
What's my head pressure?
That's right.
Right? I still need my head pressure. I'm going to take that pressure. I'm going to take my PT chart, or I'm going to look on the gauges.
Sure.
And I'm
Same
going to
thing. It's a
convert
PT
that
chart.
to a temperature.
And like Paul said, we've got coil subcooling, which is measured right coming out of the condenser, or we have system subcooling, which is measured at the inlet of the metering device.
That's right.
Right.
Which is another reason, too, if you think about this, too. What state of refrigerant do I want it going into the metering device? Liquid, 100%
all
liquid.
liquid.
How do I prove it's 100% liquid? If it's subcooled, it's 100% liquid.
Yeah. It has to be. Yeah. Subcooling means it's liquid. And I need that. I need a solid column of liquid. If I got vapor going to that metering device, I'm not going to have refrigeration.
You're going to have high flash gas.
Yeah. Can't do that.
Right.
And if it's a TXV, it's going to hunt.
Yeah. It's going to.
So it's one of those things now that I've noticed, having been in the field, is a lot of people have the digital gauges now, so they can hook everything up and they can see their subheat or their superheat and their subcool pretty easily. Problem is, if you don't understand it, you don't know where to go.
Yeah.
So let's say your superheat is out of tolerance, you're not in that 0 to 5 for Mitsubishi. What would, let's say, a high superheat indicate on our system?
It's low charge.
Low charge. It could be a low charge.
Yeah.
The same thing with on the subcooling.
High subcooling, overcharge, sure.
Yep.
And that's why the discharge superheat is so critical.
It is.
So I'm going to bring it back to that because a high discharge, a higher than normal discharge temperature, or a high discharge superheat, it's a indication of low charge.
So, not one thing. When we check a system, we don't check one thing.
No.
I like to say minimum of 3 to 5 things for verification that the charge is good.
Look, I'm going to make another confession.
You are?
Yeah. When I first started in this business,
Yes, my son.
bless me, Roland, for I have sinned. When I first started in this business, because I didn't know any better and I was taught wrong,
Yeah?
I would only throw the low side hose on.
Yeah.
I'd just look at my
Suction
superheat,
pressure.
just the suction pressure. I'd hardly ever. I'm going to say probably the first few months I was in the field, I never put the high side hose on because people told me just look at the superheat.
I think we were all told that. It doesn't matter on the high side. It's the low side. Just worry about the low side. Not true.
Yeah, but those gauges, and I know people like digital stuff. I've never liked digital stuff. Even when I had a meter, I carried an analog meter because, my old Simpson, what's that number? The old big Simpson
Like
meter?
the 50. I know what you want to
Yeah.
do. They're all cracked.
Yeah.
Every one of them are cracked.
Yeah,
They
I
have
saw-
them level.
I saw a guy that had a brand new one, right? It looked just like the one I had that was 30 years old. Exactly the same thing. Anyway, I digress. I like analog simply because to me it's more accurate. Digital can get out of calibration.
Right.
But Bryn brings up a good point. I need to look at the whole system. Right. If I suspect a refrigeration issue, whether I use gauges or a maintenance tool or whatever I'm going to use, I need my suction pressure, I need my head pressure, I need those converted to the saturation temperatures, and I need the temperatures of the refrigerant lines in different places.
And let me back up on this, and let me tell you something really important. I always say 3 things before you check anything: airflow, airflow. What's the third one? Airflow. Because you could have a plugged up filter, and that could throw all your numbers off. So realistically, before you get out there and do anything, make sure your grills are open, make sure there's nothing blocking your return, make sure your filters are clean and your coils are clean. So check your airflow before you do any troubleshooting.
Without proper airflow, you cannot have proper pressures and you cannot have proper temperatures.
Your cycle's going to be way off.
And throwing your gauges on is not the first thing you got to go for.
No.
And the reason I do it, the reason I tell people you don't throw your gauges on is every time you throw your gauges on, a couple of things can happen. First
Possibility of a couple things
Possibility you're robbing that system of refrigerant.
Yeah.
Right?
Non-condensables.
There's a possibility you're putting contaminants into the system. And Roland, you and I we had taught at the same school.
Yep.
And we had 5 weeks of air conditioning where the mechanical stuff, where these guys, the students were putting on gauges.
30, 40 times.
They were recovering, it would be done. It would be done, for 5 weeks. That's what they would do. They would throw their gauges on, they'd recover, they'd evacuate, they'd charge. And we would lose 30 to 40 pounds of refrigerant just on what they left in the gauges. We'd go through a can and a half of refrigerant.
Yeah.
So, so that can happen. You put your gauges on as a last resort if you have to, right? And then for our systems, you want to put it in the test run because we got a variable frequency, variable speed compressor that's going to vary on the load. In fact, not to get off topic here, but we had guys come in and did a study, this organization up in Massachusetts. They came into our training room. They took half their charge out of a 1-to-1 system, and they still had a good delta T, and they still had a good superheat and a good subcooling. But that compressor was racing. If that's in somebody's house, they're not going to notice a difference comfort-wise with half a charge.
Comfort-wise,
they'll notice a difference when they get their electric bill.
Absolutely.
Hey, why is this compressor just full speed the whole time? So unless you put it in the test run, you don't get the test run locks it in at a frequency, and there are charts in the service diagram you can go at where it should give you look at the outdoor ambient, you look at the indoor temperature, and it should give you the pressure curves and where you should be.
Yeah, and that's something that you see in the field too, is that a lot of times if you show up for a no cool or even a no heat, at that point the system's already almost flat. We've already almost lost most of that charge, and that's because our compressors are trying to make that work. They're targeting those numbers, and they're trying to make your heat or your cooling. So because it can do that on half the charge, because of the way that compressor ramps up and down, by the time you get there for that no cool call, you could be flat. You could be just about flat with very little refrigerant in the system.
Right. Yeah, good point.
All right. What else we need to know about superheat?
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Basic, which is what our purpose was for this one, and just getting this into the field, and then we probably more than likely will have another one deeper into what.
It's nice to
what it
reminisce.
looks like.
Yeah.
Nice to reminisce.
Yeah, and if you're out in the truck, you're listening to us. You're on the job site, you're listening to us. First of all, I'm sorry. Second of all, if you have any questions, by all means, shoot us a question. Well, we love your emails. METUS Tech Show at hvac.mea.com. We'll take your question eventually.
What was
I think we should do a whole
email
podcast.
again? What was that?
METUS Tech Show at hvac.mea.com.
Nice.
I think we should have a whole podcast that's just
Just some
committed to
questions.
answering, like call it a mailbag, and we'll just answer
Most
questions that get sent in.
Yeah, most of the emails we get, we can't read on the air, but
We can edit them.
I'll translate.
Yeah, we can filter.
the
filter
most
through 'em.
the most emails we ever got on any topic, believe it or not, was when we were talking about with Scott was here talking about his smoking
you're
a
kidding me.
brisket. Fat side or fat side up or fat side down?
Fat side down.
It was so controversial. No, most people are fat side up, but that was so controversial. That topic, we had more emails on that than any other topic. It was like people are telling us fat side up, fat side up, fat side. I mean, I couldn't believe it.
Well, then in that case, I've been doing it wrong.
We should get to do a whole episode
Five
just on
sides
that.
up.
Well, we could throw a
61
couple of those in there,
degrees
break it
to
up.
roll down the meat.
Listen, I think it's a preference, just like the toilet paper roll. Over, mullet.
Oh, there's no discussion on that.
Okay, all right, let's go. Let's move on. Anyway,
All right.
thank you everyone for listening.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Good topic. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, I mean, we do trainings, and if you want any more in-depth, information about Mitsubishi specific when it comes to superheat subcooling, all that stuff that's addressed in our
we cover
MMP, our
that.
advanced MMP.
All our classes.
And Brian, that's a great thing, because I need to add also, besides the training that anyone can attend, take some time and spend some time in the books.
All right. I just want to say one
You
thing, too.
need to learn theory.
This is my first podcast with Bryn.
Yeah.
Welcome.
He's awesome.
Welcome to the team.
He's awesome. He
Thank you
speaks
very
good
much.
English.
And listen,
too.
let's get back to training before we just say
Pack the
goodbye.
cat.
We're actually, if you're interested, keep an eye on our LMS. Go to MitsubishiComfort.com. Go to the professionals tab and look at our classes. We will be having coming up probably beginning of next year. We're going to start teaching basic electricity, basic refrigeration classes. So if you missed it, listen. If you're a seasoned tech and you need a refresher, attend those classes. If you're a tech was brand new, you didn't get that good education in school, attend those classes. Each one of them is 3 days long. They're held at our training centers, and for us, they're a lot of fun to teach. Getting back to basics. And we did the pilot classes. We had a couple of guys come in and they loved them. So keep an eye out for that. All right.
All right.
We're good. Once again, say goodbye again.
Hasta la vista.
I'll be back.
Adios.
Goodbye.
Até amanhã.